Alrighty. Rest my arms by switching and my flip-flop. I forget where I got these flip-flops. I got them a while ago. And I haven't used them in a long time, and it broke. And I keep fixing it when I take a break, but now it seems it's really broken. So, share a bit of what occurs in a journey and my experiences, some of my experience with these substances, as well as some of the bigger picture of what sort of benefits people are experiencing with this. So, as I mentioned, while in the Marine Corps, I learned about, hey, these substances have some potential benefit. And I was really interested by that. I did some research, some basic research, not going deeply into it, because I knew either way, while I'm active in the military, I'm not going to be doing this because they are not acceptable. Then I left the military, and I subsequently was introduced to them. I had kind of forgotten about them, actually. And then in a conversation in a foreign country, I was reintroduced via that conversation. And so I subsequently went back to doing some research, and I had some friends who were also interested in exploring them for these sorts of, creativity and open-minded thinking, divergent thinking, if you're familiar with that term. And so we did more research, and we began moving forward with utilizing substances. We were going about it in we were reading books. There's one book that I highly recommend. It's named The Psychedelic Explorer's Guide. It's written by Dr. Fadiman, the man that I mentioned is in the Tim Ferriss podcast. And that really does a nice job of talking about the history, talking about how to prepare for a journey, during a journey, and then one of the most important things to get real life change is integrating what you experienced after the journey. So the people that I was with that we began exploring this, we were going, as we say in the psychedelic world, like you shake hands with the substance. You don't just go in and take a bunch and let's blast off to the moon. I have no idea what's going on. Start small. You connect with it. Build a relationship with it. You get to know a little bit about it. You get to know how to maneuver this space, because this space is very different from pretty much anything else that you're ever going to experience out in the 3D physical world. Now, I will share a little bit of my thoughts on what I think potentially occurs in a psychedelic journey. We know, if we believe science, that what we see right now is a very small amount of the light spectrum. And we know that there are things like infrared. In the military or in civilian life, you can get an infrared camera. You can see these different colors of the spectrum. We know that bats fly around and they operate largely off of sonar. They send out noises, and when that sound is reflected in waves at a certain frequency, then they are able to see that in a different sort of way, what we would call see, than we do by actually visually seeing something. So there's a lot, we know, we don't even need to believe that. If you have a cell phone and you're watching this right now, you know that there's something more out there than what you can see, because your cell phone's not connected to me. You're not right with me right now. So somehow that information, when we make a phone call or when we watch something, it's coming. It's there somewhere, but we can't see it. And my thinking is that is because the brain is a filter. Consciousness is big and vast, or maybe we would say limitless. And the brain filters certain things, and we can see this by using things like magnetic resonance imaging, MRIs. We can see which parts of the brains activate at different times when doing different things. And so what they have found is they have been studying psychedelics and putting people in MRI machines and doing other sorts of brain evaluations with them. So what they have found in the day-to-day life, The human being, the general human being who's not awakened, not enlightened, they have what neuroscientists call the default mode network. And the default mode network is just a broad term for these different parts of the brain that are generally activating and operating as we go through life. And they're the ones that kind of we unconsciously rely on to believe, okay, this is me. They tell me, okay, you're a man. You know, you look like this. You have light skin. You think this way. You like green stuff. You know, you don't like inhaling smoke. You like salsa. You know, you don't like, I don't know what food I don't like. It's like, these days, as my mind expands, you know, like I enjoy most everything. But anyways, the default mode network is where our stories about ourselves are. And parts of those stories from basically everyone who's not awakened is also harmful, right? You had this happen to you, and so therefore you're afraid of this. You had this happen to you, and so this is a really big thing that you need to keep looping on for years and decades afterwards. You don't like this sort of person because that sort of person does this, and that's bad, you know? All those sorts of things. You are a depressive person. That's who you are. When you get up, you feel this way. You are an obsessive person. You can't go through a door without doing this or whatever. These are all stories that the default mode network creates and continually shares with us. So the current neuroscience understanding is. And what they have seen as they study brains who ingest a certain psychedelics, I mean all psychedelics, they see it in slightly different ways, but is that the default mode network for a period of time goes offline. There's no more energy going to the default mode network, which means that we see life physically and internally in a different way. We don't have the stories about this is a stone, and a stone means it's a hard thing, and it's, I don't really like it because it's rough, and, all of those things. Instead, we see it as this, we don't have the story about it. There's a quote from a film you can find on YouTube that I highly recommend named Samadhi, Samadhi. There's 3 of them now, and I think this is from the second one, but I don't remember. But if I remember correctly, it's something to the effect of the first time a child sees a bird, if it is told what a bird is, after that, it never sees a bird again. It only sees what it's told a bird is. Because we create stories, and you can see this throughout your life. If you're a person who speaks a lot about the past, about, oh, this happened to me, or this is what I believe, or, oh, I remember when I was a child and this sort of thing happened, you can assume that what you're remembering is not actually the experience, but it's a story that you created about the experience, that you subsequently, the brain now just goes to that story. It's a shortcut. I don't have to remember all the way back to that thing. I just remember what I believe about that. That's the default mode network. And so when the default mode network shuts off with these different psychedelic substances, we experience reality, which is, in my opinion, just a bunch of neutral phenomena that occurs. We experience it as that neutral phenomena. And so subsequently people, let's say someone who has had a traumatic experience, and I don't say trauma because trauma, in my opinion, and from my understanding and learning, trauma is something that's self-created. So we can have a traumatic experience. I can be attacked, I can be harmed, I can be raped. But the story that I create about it determines whether or not it becomes trauma. And in the current developed world in the West, we currently seem to be very much in a society that is very much about promoting trauma. And it's about, it may be coming from a positive place, I don't know. Do I think it's helpful? No, I don't. I think it's harmful. To where it's all about focus on the story. You are a victim, this is unfair, we need justice, all of those sorts of things. I'm not saying that there aren't things that can be improved and that when something harmful occurs, there should be something that, stops that or brings about healing. Obviously, yes. But that's very different from saying, I'm a victim and I'm going to create this victim story and I'm going to allow it to run my life moving forward. And I'm going to allow this thing that happened in the past that is no longer here, I'm going to allow that to control me for the rest of my life. I'm going to allow that to affect the way I see everything, the way I operate with people, instead of acknowledging that that was something that happened and now there were results to it, and so I move forward with those to the best that I'm currently able to heal them and move forward positively, but it's not something that's currently here, and so I don't need to let it control myself. And so when we ingest a psychedelic, let's say we've had a traumatic experience in the past, this is a very common thing. Everyone in the world that's ever been born, I will imagine, I won't say bet because I don't support that sort of unconscious energy, but I would love to see one person who's been born who hasn't experienced a traumatic event. We all experience traumatic events, all of us, all the time. And so we've had some sort of traumatic experience. We've created a story about, we ingest the substance, the default mode network goes off. We're able to subsequently see things in a different light. And so we're able to see that experience without all of the stories and all of the clenching and the pushing away that we have created all this time. We're able to see it without that. And we're able to see it for what it is, which is an experience, a neutral experience that occurred that we don't need to let control ourselves anymore. And so people experience great psychological healing when ingesting substances, psychedelics, especially when done intentionally. It's a very common thing. It's probably what they're most used for, It's very common. And with that physical healing, because as science has shown us, though it's not commonly talked about, but there's tons of research, science has shown us that the vast majority of physical ailments that we have, even things that seem like so obvious, like cancer or diabetes or things like that, oh, it's caused by this, they're psychosomatic. They are caused by the mind being in an unhealthy place to where there's something being repressed, there's not something that's not being handled, there's some unhealthy energy story occurring. And so subsequently, to get that energy out, it manifests as some physical ailment in the body. This is very common, very well understood. Just do a little bit of digging, get beneath the surface of, Healthline or whatever, whatever those pop medicine websites are. And so this is what people experience often with psychedelics. So that's one benefit. Another one is the creativity. If the default mode network is off, i.e. if this box that we see everything by is now dissolved for a period of time, then we're able to subsequently see things in a different way. And this is why there's very many people that general society now looks up to, including people like Steve Jobs, who utilized psychedelic substances at some point, and either as a regular practice or just one or two times to get that experience and to see, oh wow, there's actually so much more available here than what I realized. Because as I said, right now, our vision only sees a certain amount of the light spectrum, but we know there's a lot more out there. And as I said, I believe that the brain is currently understood that the brain is a filtering mechanism. So when the default mode network goes off, they're also able to physically or visibly experience, auditorily, all the different senses, experience things that are there, but we don't normally experience. And so you see things differently, you hear things differently, the mind is operating differently, it's making different connections. As they study the brain, they see that the different neurons, the different brain cells that don't normally connect with each other, that they connect with each other. And so they see different parts of the brain lighting up on these brain imaging scans and things. They see, and so you experience ways of thinking and ways of seeing the world that you never did before that really is mind-blowing. Like, think back to something in your life where you experienced some insight that really blew your mind of like, oh wow, I didn't even realize all this time I've been going about life thinking in this one way, and I just realized that there's something totally different possible. Like, that's what I'm talking about when I'm saying mind-blowing, and that's another very common experience on psychedelics. Creativity. It's utilized for creativity, for problem solving, for seeing different things in different ways. So we've got assisting with things like traumatic experiences and healing, physical and mental. We've got creativity. We've got what I mentioned in the previous, connection, feeling of love, like deep love. I'm not talking about the like love of like I love you if you love me and let's do this transactional sort of thing where we like validate each other. I'm talking about coming from the core, where it feels like really this is the most true thing that I have felt. Love for self first of all, because that's the foundation of everything. How can I love anything else if I don't love myself? Literally, it's not possible. And then that spreading out into the world. So changes in relationships with family, changes in relationships, like I said, with nature. Feeling more love, feeling more connection, and not just from like I feel more connection because now I'm more loving and so people are more interested in being around me, so I have more friends. Doesn't matter. I can be walking through walking down the street, surrounded by people that I don't know, not interacting with anyone, and I still feel more love to them and from them than I did before. So these are three of the great benefits. Also taking away a sense of fear, because there are very challenging things in psychedelic journeys as well, as you can imagine. If you're in a state for a period of time, for hours, where all of a sudden the boundaries and the walls and things that your mind has been so used to are down, then it can feel potentially very confusing, very scary, very frightening, because the mind is so used to holding on to those things. And as we talked about, change or the unknown or the uncertain, the mind has been conditioned to believe that that's scary. Now it's possible, very possible, to train yourself through meditation and other things to actually view that as very exciting because it's possibilities and potentials. But in the world that we live in, largely the message that we receive from the media and from other people, intentionally or unintentionally, is to like be afraid of what's different and hold on to very tightly and closely to the small amount of the world that you know and push out others. So there can be challenging experiences. And yet you can't stop this one, like you're not shutting off the psychedelic journey. It's going to continue on for however long it's going to continue on. And these different substances last, some for 10 or 15 minutes, very intense, some for 12, 14 or longer hours, And so you get a lot of practice, especially if you have a practice like meditation or something else, of being equanimous. Then you get a lot of practice in being in situations that previously you would have thought were scary or challenging or difficult or whatever. You get a lot of practice with being with them and seeing the positives, seeing the potential, seeing the other perspectives of them and being able to flow through them. And at the same time, you gain some sort of insight, potentially, gain some sort of vision to the fact that this small little world that we have been taught to believe and we've subsequently latched onto of, this little physical world of my body, my stuff, my family, like that's everything. That's the whole world, this physical experience is the whole thing. And so like we feel a lot of like hopelessness underneath because of that, because we know we're going to die. So far, to the best of my knowledge, everyone dies. We know that the people that we love are all going to die at some point. Every person that you know is going to be dead. We know that. We might not think about it. We might repress it. We might use alcohol and other substances to try and avoid it, and binge watch, and work a lot and look at pornography and do these things to avoid these very clear truths. But they're there. And when we avoid things, they just, they don't go away. They fester and they rot. And so experiencing a psychedelic journey, you get some perspective that, actually, what I thought was the whole of existence is a tiny fraction of what's possible and what's available and what exists right now. So it doesn't mean that logically you know, like, okay, well, that means that I get to do this. No, it's not that. It's just that the mind is no longer so latched on to this tiny little existence that it also knows is going to end. It's connected to something bigger, whether we say it's God, whether we say it's Gaia, whether we say it's the universe, whether we say it's energy, whether we just say it's something bigger, whether we don't even say that it is something, it's just not being identified to this small thing. And that brings a lot of peace. And that's why some of the big studies with Johns Hopkins have been with people who are nearing death through cancer or through other things. And so they have been studying them as they ingest these substances. And to see their fear of death and their ability to enjoy and live these remaining days, it's been really transformative for them. So that is some. Let me think here of some other benefits. Oh, also it can just be fun. It can be fun. I said I don't condone utilizing it just for partying, mixing with alcohol and unconscious behavior. But that doesn't mean we don't enjoy life. Obviously, let's enjoy life. And you can utilize these substances in different ways. The general way is what we call a macro dose. That means take an amount to where you're experiencing like, whoa, I'm seeing things differently, I'm thinking differently. Then there's what's called a micro dose. And this is where you take, the general protocol is once every 3 days, you take a small amount to where you're not, it's subperceptual, you're not really feeling anything, you're not really perceiving anything, but you do that every 3 days, and then, track that and journal that, and look back, and you see over a course of weeks or months, oh wow, actually, yeah, my mood seemed to be up here more, my creativity or my ability to be in these sorts of situations or whatever. So those are kind of the two. There's the macro, which is like very obvious. There's the micro, which is subperceptual. And then in between that, there's the gamut, There's one dose that we call a museum dose, which is an amount to where you're still functional. You can still operate in the world. You can walk, and you don't need to just lay down and be with this internal experience. You can interact with people, but you also have some changes in your thinking and in your vision and your hearing and things, your senses, to where things become really interesting, as they always are. But the default mode network has put these blocks on them saying, no, that's not interesting, that's just a thing. I was with a friend not too long ago, and we were in nature, and she saw this beautiful neon light blue flower in the distance, and not so far away, but she saw it, and she was like, wow, that is beautiful, look at that, it's incredible, it's beautiful. And I knew what it was, and so I didn't say anything, and I agreed with her, because it is. And I just let her have that experience. And subsequently later, she saw me say, oh, you know what? I saw that thing. It wasn't a flower. It's a piece of plastic. It's just a piece of plastic. That's the default mode network. Because she saw it without having the label of what it was. And she saw beauty there. Because there's beauty there. There's beauty everywhere. And once the mind knew what it was, it put that label on it. It didn't see it anymore. It just said, this is something that's trash. That's the default mode network. And so on a museum dose, or these different types of doses, you can have very enjoyable, higher level conversations with people, because you're not in these same sort of little ruts that you may otherwise be in, where you kind of coming from a place of insecurity or a little bit of judgment or whatever like that. You can experience really interesting conversations. The mind is connecting in different ways. You can flow with people and connect in really incredible ways. I've had some very incredible experiences. My first experiences with this, where it was with other people, I have a little journal. It's called a One a Day. You can find them online. And it's just a thing like this. And every day of the year, there's a question, and there's spaces for 5 places, so that for 5 years you can answer the same question. And when I first got it, I just thought it was cool. I didn't recognize what a great tool it is, how it's really it's very beneficial to have. I've subsequently given many of them away, but you can Google it, One a Day, because you get to see your consciousness, your awareness, the way that you saw the world, the way that you thought, all these different times over years. So it might be just a little question that seems silly, like, what did you eat today? Or what are you wearing? Or what is your favorite piece of clothing? That might seem like just something silly, but you see over a period of years, and you see, wow, that was where my values were, or look at these patterns that come out, or whatever. And I like to also put a little thing about what I was doing or experiencing that day. And I just saw the one where I was with this group of people where we had not a strong dose of psychedelics, but we had a dose of psychedelics together in a gathering that was fun, but not unconscious. And I wrote afterwards that it was one of the most incredible experiences of my life. It blew my mind to be able to interact with people that way, and with all the conversations and the insight, and just how much I learned, and just enjoying so much. Because also tactilely, these can be pleasurable. Some of them can be not pleasurable, and some of them can be. So there are those, these are some of the different benefits.